My name is Anna, and for 12 years, I have been the wind beneath Mark's wings. When we met, he was a struggling medical student with nothing but a mountain of debt and a brilliant mind. I was the one who worked 3 jobs, waitressing in the morning, office temping in the afternoon, and cleaning luxury condos at night, just so he could focus on his rotations. I wore shoes with holes in them so he could have the best stethoscope. I skipped meals so he could buy the textbooks that would eventually make him a world-renowned plastic surgeon. Now, Mark is the owner of the Zenith Clinic, the most prestigious aesthetic surgery center in the city. He drives a car that costs more than my childhood home, and his face is on the cover of every lifestyle magazine. But as his star rose, I stayed in the shadows. I became the safe wife, the one who stayed home with our 2 children, managed the household, and made sure his silk shirts were pressed to perfection. The shift didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, agonizing erosion. First, he stopped inviting me to dinner with his colleagues because the medical talk would bore me. Then, he started suggesting I freshen up my look, pointing out the tired lines around my eyes, lines I earned while staying up with our sick kids while he was at gala dinners. The breaking point came last night at the Zenith Clinic's 10th anniversary gala. I had spent weeks finding a dress that made me feel like the woman I used to be. It was a modest emerald silk gown, elegant but simple. I spent 2 hours on my hair and makeup, hoping to see a spark of the old love in Mark's eyes. But when I walked down the stairs, he didn't smile. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance. "You're wearing that?" he asked, checking his Rolex. "Anna, tonight is about branding. Look at the people who will be there. Investors, celebrities, socialites. You look like, well, you look like a tired mother. Can't you at least put on some of the jewelry I bought you?" "I am wearing the necklace you gave me for our 5th anniversary, Mark," I said, my voice trembling. "That old thing? It's tiny. People will think I'm struggling." He sighed, a sound of pure exasperation. "Just try to stay in the corner and keep the talking to a minimum, okay? I don't want to have to explain what logistics or household management is to the CEO of Global Med." At the gala, it was worse than I imagined. Mark spent the entire night parading around with his lead surgical assistant, Chloe. She was 24, blonde, and cinched into a dress that cost more than my first car. She laughed at all his jokes and touched his arm with a familiarity that made my stomach churn. I was standing near the buffet, holding a glass of sparkling water, when I overheard them talking behind a decorative hedge. "She's such a drag on your image, Mark," Chloe's voice purred. "Everyone is asking why the king of beauty is married to someone so plain. It's bad for business." I held my breath, waiting for Mark to defend me. Waiting for him to tell her that I was the reason he had a clinic at all. "I know, Chloe," Mark replied, his voice cold and detached. "Believe me, I know. She was useful in the beginning, she was the fuel that got the engine running. But you can't win a Formula One race with a minivan. I've already spoken to my lawyer. I'm just waiting for the right moment to serve the papers. I need to make sure the clinic's assets are shielded first. I'm not letting her take half of what I built just because she paid for a few textbooks a decade ago." "And the kids?" Chloe asked. "She's unstable, isn't she?" Mark chuckled. "The stress of my career, the isolation, it's been hard on her mental health. My lawyer says we can build a very strong case for full custody. She can have a small monthly stipend and a 1-bedroom apartment in the suburbs. That's more than she started with." I felt the world tilt. The man I had sacrificed my youth for wasn't just leaving me, he was planning to erase me. He was planning to take my children and label me unstable to protect his precious brand. But Mark had made one fatal mistake. He assumed that because I was quiet, I was stupid. He assumed that because I stayed at home, I was doing nothing. For the last 5 years, while Mark was busy preening for the cameras, I had been busy with his books. I knew every penny that came in and out of that clinic. And more than that, I had been using my small allowance and the inheritance from my grandmother to play a much bigger game. I turned away from the hedge, my eyes dry and my heart turning to ice. If Mark wanted a war, he was about to find out that the minivan he despised was actually a Trojan horse. I walked out of the gala without saying a word. I didn't go home. I drove to a small, nondescript office building downtown. I let myself in with a private key and sat at a desk that bore a nameplate Mark had never seen, A.V. Sterling, principal investor. It was time to look at the lease for the Zenith Clinic. Because Mark didn't own the building. I did. And his shielded assets? I had moved them months ago. I sat in my dark office for a long time, the glow of the computer monitor illuminating the emerald silk dress Mark had called plain. To the world, I was Anna Miller, the quiet wife who made organic school lunches. But in this room, I was A.V. Sterling. The strategy had started 5 years ago as a hobby. I had taken a small $10,000 inheritance from my grandmother and invested it in a distressed commercial property. I discovered I had a knack for seeing the hidden value in things, much like I had seen the potential in Mark. I flipped that property, then another. I moved into REITs, real estate investment trusts, and eventually private equity. Mark never noticed. He was too busy looking at his own reflection or the growing numbers in his clinic's operating account. He never questioned why I didn't ask for more household money. He just assumed I was being frugal because of my working class roots. I pulled up the digital file for Project Scalpel. It was the folder I had created the moment I noticed Mark had started hiding his phone and staying late at the hospital on Fridays. I opened the scanned copies of his clinic's lease agreement. The Zenith Clinic was located in a premier glass tower on Fifth Avenue. Mark bragged to everyone that he had a 99-year ironclad lease. What he forgot, or rather, what he never bothered to check, was that the parent company that owned the tower had been bought out by a holding group called Sterling and Associates 18 months ago. I was his landlord. And according to the fine print in Section 14, Paragraph C, any moral turpitude or legal scandal involving the primary tenant that could devalue the building's reputation is grounds for immediate lease review and potential termination. I felt a cold smile touch my lips. Mark was planning to label me as unstable to take the children. He was going to use his status as a pillar of the community to crush me in a divorce court. He had no idea that I had spent the last year documented his own instability, the offshore accounts he was using to hide money from the IRS, the business trips to the Maldives with Chloe that were paid for using clinic funds, and the kickbacks he was receiving from a shady medical supply company. I heard my phone buzz. It was a text from Mark. "Where are you? You disappeared from the gala." It was incredibly embarrassing. People were asking where my wife went, and I had to tell them you weren't feeling well again. Just stay at the house. Don't make a scene. I didn't reply. Instead, I called my lead investigator, a retired forensic accountant named Elias. "Elias," I said, my voice crackling with a newfound power. "It's time. I want the full audit on the Zenith Clinic's procurement records sent to the anonymous tip line at the medical board. And that shell company Mark set up in the Cayman Islands? Make sure the IRS gets a leak about the incoming wire transfers." "Are you sure, Anna?" Elias asked, his voice gravelly. "Once we pull these threads, the whole sweater unravels. He'll lose the clinic." "He's planning to take my children, Elias," I replied, staring at a framed photo on my desk of my son and daughter. "He wants to put me in a one-bedroom apartment and call me a madwoman. He doesn't just deserve to lose the clinic. He deserves to lose the pedestal he thinks he's standing on." I drove home and slipped into bed just minutes before I heard Mark's car pull into the driveway. I pretended to be asleep when he walked in. He didn't even come to my side of the bed. He went straight to the guest shower, smelling of expensive cologne and Chloe's perfume. The next morning, the minivan was in the driveway as usual. I made the kids breakfast, packed their bags, and kissed them goodbye with a heart that felt like it was breaking. They had no idea their world was about to change. At 9 a.m., Mark came down, looking sharp in a tailored navy suit. He didn't look at me as he poured himself a coffee. I have a big meeting with the global med investors today, Anna. Don't call me. And for heaven's sake, do something about the house. It's cluttered. I might bring some of the board members back here for drinks later. Of course, Mark, I said, my voice soft and obedient. I'll make sure everything is exactly where it belongs. As he walked out the door, he didn't notice the man in a plain suit standing at the end of the driveway. It was a process server. But he wasn't there for me. As Mark reached his car, the man stepped forward. Mark Miller? You've been served. Mark laughed, a high, arrogant sound. This must be a mistake. Is this about the zoning permit? My lawyers will handle it. No, sir, the man said. It's a lawsuit regarding breach of fiduciary duty and fraudulent asset concealment. Also, here is a notice from your landlord. You have 48 hours to vacate the Zenith Clinic for violation of the moral turpitude clause. Mark's coffee cup hit the pavement, shattering. He looked at the papers, then back at the house. I was standing in the window, holding my own cup of coffee, no longer wearing the emerald silk dress, but looking at him with the cold, calculated gaze of A.V. Sterling. The war hadn't just started. I had already won the first move. Mark stood by his car, frozen, as the process server walked away. He stared at the papers in his hand, his face transitioning from confusion to a deep, ugly shade of crimson. He didn't come back inside. He hopped into his Porsche and roared out of the driveway, presumably heading to the clinic to fix the mistake. I watched him go, then calmly picked up my phone. I dialed my legal counsel, Marcus Thorne. Marcus was the kind of lawyer who didn't take cases, he took over lives. He's on his way to the office, Marcus, I said. He'll be calling his usual firm, Sterling and Whitaker, within the hour. Let him call, Marcus chuckled. He doesn't realize that Sterling and Whitaker was acquired by my firm's parent company last month. I've already sent out the conflict of interest notices to every top-tier divorce and corporate litigation firm in the city. By the time he finishes his first cup of coffee at the clinic, he'll find out that every lawyer worth their salt is already representing, well, you. I hung up and went to work. I wasn't cleaning the house for his investors. I was packing a go-bag for the children and me. Not because I was running away, but because I was moving us into the penthouse suite at the Sterling Hotel, another one of my acquisitions. Around 11 a.m., my phone erupted. It was Mark. I let it ring. Then came the texts, a barrage of frantic, caps-locked rage. Anna, pick up the phone. What is this joke? Who is A.V. Sterling? Why are security guards blocking the clinic entrance? Call me now or I swear you'll never see a dime. I waited until exactly 12:30 p.m., the time Mark usually had his catered lunch, to call him back. Anna, he screamed the moment he answered. What the hell is going on? There are men in suits at the clinic auditing my surgical logs. The landlord, this Sterling Group, has padlocked the VIP wing. My lawyers aren't returning my calls. Did you have something to do with this? I told you I'd make sure everything was exactly where it belongs, Mark, I said, my voice as smooth as glass. And right now, you belong in the reality you created. You're behind this? He let out a manic laugh. You? You can't even balance a checkbook without asking me for the login. How could you possibly influence a Fifth Avenue landlord? Mark, you've spent 12 years looking at me and seeing a minivan. You never bothered to look at the engine. You thought I was frugal because I was poor. I was frugal because I was investing. I don't just influence the landlord. I am the landlord. I bought your building 18 months ago using the profits from the tech IPO I backed in 2021. There was a long, suffocating silence on the other end of the line. I could hear his heavy breathing, the sound of a man who suddenly realized the ground beneath him had turned to thin air. You're lying, he whispered. This is some kind of mental breakdown. Chloe was right. You're unstable. If I'm unstable, Mark, then your clinic's financial records are a work of fiction. I've spent the morning speaking with the medical board. It turns out that using clinic funds to pay for Chloe's apartment and your research trips to the Maldives is considered embezzlement when you have minority partners. And those partners? They're very interested in the audit I just handed them. Anna, wait, his voice shifted. The rage was gone, replaced by the oily tone he used when he was trying to charm a wealthy patient. Let's talk about this. We're a team. If the clinic goes down, the family goes down. Think of the kids. I am thinking of the kids, Mark. I'm thinking about the fact that you wanted to take them away from me and put them in a house run by a man who calls their mother a stain on his reputation. You don't get to use the team card when you've already signed the papers to trade me in for a newer model. I'll fight you, he hissed, the venom returning. I have the best reputation in this city. I'll hire a tiger. I'll spend every cent I have to ruin you. With what money, Mark? I froze the joint accounts this morning due to suspicious activity, which, legally, is true, given your offshore transfers. And as for your tiger? Every major firm in the city just flagged you as a conflict of interest. You aren't going to find a tiger. You'll be lucky to find a paralegal who'll take your case for a pro bono fee. I hung up. I walked through our house, the house I had kept perfect for a man who hated my presence. I took the framed photos of my children and left the keys on the marble countertop. As I drove away, I saw a news van pulling up toward the clinic in my rearview mirror. The King of Beauty was about to have his deepest, ugliest secrets broadcast to the entire city. And the best part? I hadn't even started on chloeyet.by 3 p.m., the news was everywhere. The headline on the city's biggest tabloid read, "Surgery Scandal, Zenith Clinic Under Audit for Embezzlement." A grainy photo of Mark shielding his face from reporters was already trending on social media. I was sitting in the quiet luxury of my new penthouse, watching the chaos unfold on a tablet. My children were in the other room with their favorite nanny, blissfully unaware that their father's kingdom was crumbling. Then, my phone pinged with a notification from the clinic's security feed. Mark wasn't at the clinic anymore. He had retreated to a private hotel suite, the one he usually kept for his consultations with Chloe. But thanks to the GPS tracker on the car he didn't know I owned, I knew exactly who else was there. I dialed Chloe's personal number. She answered on the second ring, her voice sounding frantic. Hello? Who is this? If this is a reporter, I have nothing to say. Hello, Chloe, I said, my voice calm and conversational. It's Anna. Or as Mark likes to call me, the minivan. There was a sharp intake of breath. Anna? What do you want? Mark is going through a crisis right now. This is a very sensitive legal matter. Oh, I know all about the crisis, Chloe. I'm the one who orchestrated it. But I'm not calling to talk to Mark. I'm calling to talk to you. I'm looking at the lease for that beautiful apartment in the West End, the one Mark told you he bought for you. What about it? She snapped. That's my private residence. Actually, it's not, I replied. It's a corporate rental owned by a subsidiary of the Zenith Clinic. And since the clinic's assets are currently being frozen due to the fraud investigation, that lease has been terminated effective immediately. The locks will be changed at 6 p.m. tonight. Your designer bags, your shoes, and that jewelry Mark gave you, all of it was purchased with embezzled funds. It's all being seized as evidence. You can't do that. Chloe shrieked. Mark promised me I was taken care of. Mark promised you a fantasy built on my money, Chloe. He told you I was unstable so you'd feel better about helping him steal from our family. But here's the reality, Mark is currently broke. His bank accounts are flagged, his credit cards are declined, and his reputation is radioactive. Tell me, Chloe, are you still in love with a man who can't even afford the valet parking for his Porsche? I heard muffled shouting in the background. Mark realized she was talking to me. I heard him grab the phone. Anna, he roared. You've gone too far. You're hurting an innocent woman. Chloe has nothing to do with our marriage. Innocent? I laughed. She's been helping you forge signatures on procurement invoices for months, Mark. I have the emails. I have the logs of her logging into the system under your credentials to move money. She's not an innocent woman, she's an accomplice. And the DA is very interested in offering her a deal if she testifies against you. The line went silent. I could almost hear the gears turning in Chloe's head. She was young, ambitious, and above all, a survivor. She didn't love Mark, she loved the lifestyle he provided. And that lifestyle was currently being loaded into an evidence van. Think about it, Chloe, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. You can go down with the captain of a sinking ship, or you can walk away before the water hits your neck. If you hand over the login for Mark's offshore account, the one he thinks I don't know about, I might just forget to mention your name to the fraud investigators. Chloe, don't listen to her. Mark yelled. She's bluffing. I'll get a loan. I'll fix this. With what collateral, Mark? I asked. I own the house. I own the clinic. I even own the suit you're wearing. You are a man with a prestigious degree and absolutely zero assets. I hung up. 5 minutes later, an email popped up in my inbox. It was from Chloe. No text, just a string of numbers and a password for a private bank in Grand Cayman. She had flipped in less than 300 seconds. I looked out at the city skyline, the lights beginning to twinkle as the sun set. Mark had spent years trying to make me feel small, invisible, and replaceable. He thought he could trade me for a Formula One car. He forgot that even the fastest car can't move if someone else owns the road, the fuel, and the garage. Tomorrow was the first day of the custody hearing. Mark thought he was going to walk into that courtroom and paint me as a madwoman. He had no idea that I was walking in as the woman who held his entire life in the palm of her hand. The courthouse was swarming with reporters. Mark's fall from grace was the biggest story in the city, and the king of beauty was finally being stripped of his crown. He arrived late, flanked by a lawyer I didn't recognize, a bottom-tier shark who looked like he'd been hired in a panic. Mark's tailored suit was wrinkled, and the arrogance that usually radiated from him had been replaced by a frantic, sweating desperation. I arrived through a private entrance, accompanied by Marcus Thorne and a security detail. I wasn't wearing the emerald silk dress. I was wearing a charcoal gray power suit, my hair pulled back in a sharp, professional bun. I looked like exactly what I was, the woman who owned the room. We sat in the sterile hallway outside the family court chambers. Mark paced like a caged animal. When he saw me, he tried to storm over, but Marcus stepped in his path. Stay back, Dr. Miller, Marcus said, his voice a low rumble. Any interaction with my client without counsel present will be added to the harassment filing. Anna. Mark hissed over Marcus's shoulder. You've had your fun. You've embarrassed me. Now tell your lawyers to drop this fraud nonsense and let's handle this like adults. You're scaring the children. The children are at the Sterling penthouse, Mark, I said, not even looking up from my tablet. They're having breakfast with a world-class tutor. They aren't scared. They're finally in a home where the air isn't thick with lies. The doors to the chambers opened. Miller versus Miller. Please enter. The judge, a formidable woman named Judge Holloway, looked over her spectacles at the mountain of paperwork on her desk. Mark's lawyer stood up immediately. Your Honor, he began, his voice shaky. My client is a victim of a coordinated character assassination. His wife, Anna, has been suffering from significant mental instability. We have evidence that she has been obsessively tracking his business moves, interfering with his medical practice, and hiding family assets. We are requesting an immediate psychological evaluation and temporary full custody for Dr. Miller to ensure the children's safety. Mark nodded vigorously, putting on his concerned father face, the one he practiced in the mirror. Judge Holloway looked at Marcus. Mr. Thorne? Marcus didn't even stand up. He simply tapped a button on his laptop, and a video began to play on the monitors in the courtroom. It was the security footage from the Zenith Clinic's VIP lounge from 3 nights ago. The audio was crystal clear. It was Mark and Chloe. Mark was laughing as he toasted with a glass of vintage champagne. Once the judge sees the medical reports I've faked about Anna's depression, she'll be lucky to get supervised visits once a month. We'll sell the house, move to the coast, and she'll be stuck in a studio apartment wondering where it all went wrong. The courtroom went deathly silent. Mark's face turned from pale to a ghostly white. "Your Honor," Marcus said calmly, finally standing up. "We aren't just here to discuss custody. We are here to discuss a criminal conspiracy. Dr. Miller didn't just plan to alienate a mother from her children, he used his medical credentials to falsify records. Furthermore, we have the deposition from his former assistant, Chloe Vance, who has turned over the credentials for an offshore account containing $4 million in diverted clinic funds." "That's a lie!" Mark screamed, slamming his fist on the table. "Chloe would never. She loves me." "She loves her freedom more, Mark," I said quietly, speaking for the first time. "She took the deal I offered her last night. She's currently at the DA's office, explaining how you coached her to hide those shielded assets you were so proud of." Judge Holloway slammed her gavel. "Silence. Dr. Miller, sit down or I will have you held in contempt." She turned to me. "Mrs. Miller, your counsel has provided a rather extensive list of your own assets. It appears you aren't exactly the destitute housewife the defense described." "I am the principal of Sterling and Associates, Your Honor," I replied. "I am the majority shareholder of the building that houses the Zenith Clinic, and I am the primary creditor for Dr. Miller's outstanding business loans. I didn't hide assets. I built them. While my husband was spending his time on branding and betrayals, I was ensuring my children would never have to rely on a man like him for their future." The judge looked at Mark with pure disdain. "Dr. Miller, your petition for custody is denied. In fact, given the evidence of fraud and the falsification of medical records, I am issuing an emergency protective order. You are to have no contact with the children or Mrs. Miller until the criminal proceedings are concluded." "Criminal?" Mark stammered. "Wait, this is a divorce. You can't put me in jail for a divorce." "No," Judge Holloway said, her voice like ice. "But we can put you in jail for embezzlement, tax evasion, and conspiracy to commit medical fraud. Bailiffs, please escort Dr. Miller to the hallway. There are 2 federal agents waiting to speak with him regarding his Cayman accounts." As the bailiffs grabbed Mark's arms, he looked at me, his eyes wide with a terror I had never seen. "Anna. Please. We can fix this. I'll give you everything. Just don't let them take me." "You already gave me everything, Mark," I said as he was dragged toward the door. "You gave me the motivation to stop being your shadow. And as for fixing things? I already did. I've started the rebranding of the clinic. It won't be the Zenith anymore. It's going to be a non-profit center for reconstructive surgery for domestic abuse survivors. Your name is being scraped off the glass as we speak." The door slammed shut behind him. I sat back in my chair and took a deep breath. The minivan had just driven the Formula One car straight into a brick wall. The holding cell at the precinct was a far cry from the marble-floored VIP lounges Mark was used to. He sat on a cold bench, his $3,000 suit now wrinkled and smelling of stress, waiting for the one person who still had the power to save him. When I walked into the glass-walled visitation room, he lunged toward the partition, his eyes bloodshot. "Anna." "Thank God," he rasped, his voice cracking. "Listen, I've been thinking. Everything that happened, the fake reports, the money, it was the stress. The clinic was under so much pressure from the board, and I panicked. I did it all for us. For our future." I sat down, placing my designer briefcase on the table. I didn't say a word. I just watched him scramble for a narrative that no longer existed. "I've talked to my lawyer," he continued, leaning in. "He says if you retract your statement and claim that the Sterling acquisitions were joint marital ventures, We can settle the fraud charges as a clerical misunderstanding. We can go back to the way things were. I'll fire Chloe. I'll go to counseling. We can be the city's power couple again. Mark, I said, finally breaking the silence. My voice was calm, almost pitying. Do you still not understand? I didn't spend 5 years building a shadow empire just to go back to being the woman you ignored. I didn't buy your clinic's debt to save your career. I bought it to own your exit. You're being vindictive, he yelled, banging a fist on the table. Fine. You want the money? Take it. But you can't take the medical practice. My patients come for me. My hands are the brand. Without me, the clinic is just a building with expensive chairs. That's where you're wrong, I replied, pulling a document from my briefcase. I'm not interested in your hands, Mark. I've already replaced you. I've spent the last 6 months headhunting the 3 best reconstructive surgeons in the country. They've already signed contracts with the new foundation. Your brand is currently being scrubbed from every website, every billboard, and every social media handle. Mark's jaw dropped. You replaced me? In my own clinic? It's not your clinic. It's the A.V. Sterling Center for Restorative Hope. And since you used the clinic's trademark as collateral for that private loan last year, the one you took out to pay for Chloe's jewelry, you officially forfeited the rights to your own professional name in a commercial context. You can't even open a private practice across the street. You're a non-entity. Mark collapsed back into his seat, the reality of his total erasure finally hitting him. But I wasn't done. And about that Hail Mary you tried this morning? I asked, leaning forward. The one where you told your lawyer to leak a story to the press about how I was a secret alcoholic to explain my instability? Mark's eyes darted away. He had tried to play one last card. The journalist you tried to leak that to? He works for the Metro Gazette. I bought the Gazette 2 months ago through a shell company. He didn't run your story, Mark. He ran a story about the medical board's investigation into your falsified surgery logs instead. It's on the front page of every digital news stand right now. You're a monster, he whispered, looking at me with genuine fear. No, Mark. I'm the woman who paid for your textbooks, I said, standing up and snapping my briefcase shut. I'm the minivan that just ran over your ego. You wanted to play the high-stakes game of branding and power, but you forgot that a brand is built on trust. And you? You're a bankrupt soul. As I walked toward the door, he screamed my name, a pathetic, high-pitched sound that echoed off the concrete walls. I didn't look back. I walked out of the precinct and into the sunlight, where Marcus was waiting by the car. The IRS has officially frozen the Cayman account, Chloe revealed, Marcus said. And the board members of the clinic? They've just voted to grant you a 100% buyout for pennies on the dollar to avoid a lawsuit. It's over, Anna. You own it all. Not yet, Marcus, I said, looking at the city skyline. There's one more person who needs to learn that loyalty has a price. We need to go see Chloe. Chloe's temporary apartment was in a frantic state of disarray. Cardboard boxes were half-taped, and the scent of expensive candles couldn't mask the underlying smell of panic. When I walked through the door, which I had opened with my master key, Chloe was frantically stuffing a pair of $1,200 heels into a suitcase. She froze when she saw me. Anna. What are you doing here? I did what you asked. I gave you the credentials. I'm cooperating with the DA. We had a deal. I walked over to the marble kitchen island and traced a finger along the surface. We had an understanding, Chloe. But a deal? A deal requires a contract. And right now, the only contract I'm interested in is the one you signed when you became an employee of the Zenith Clinic. I'm leaving, she cried, her voice trembling. I'm taking my personal things and I'm going back to my parents' place. Mark is the one who did the fraud, not me. I just did what he told me. You didn't just do what he told you, Chloe, I said, pulling a laptop from my bag and turning it toward her. You were clever. You weren't just moving Mark's money. You were skimming a little off the top for yourself, weren't you? A few hundred here, 1,000 there, funneled into a separate digital wallet Mark didn't even know existed. Chloe's face went white. She looked at the screen, which showed a series of microtransactions she thought were untraceable. I'm a principal investor, Chloe, I said softly. I spend my life finding hidden numbers. You thought you were smarter than Mark, and in a way, you were. But you weren't smarter than me. Please, she whispered, sinking onto a packing crate. If the DA finds out about this, my immunity deal is gone. I'll go to prison with him. Prison is such an ugly word, I said, leaning against the counter. I'm not interested in seeing you in a cell. That would be too quick. I want you to understand exactly what it feels received when someone takes everything you built. I slid a single piece of paper across the island. This is a civil suit for the recovery of embezzled funds. The total amount, including interest and the skimming you did, comes to exactly $450,000. Every designer bag in those boxes? Every piece of jewelry? It's all been legally attached to this suit. You can't sell them. You can't even move them. I don't have that kind of money, she sobbed. I know. But your parents do, I replied. They have that lovely retirement home in the suburbs. The one Mark helped them by using, you guessed it, clinic funds. Since that money was stolen from the company I now own, I'm foreclosing on that property on Monday. Chloe lunged toward me, her hands outstretched in a plea. No. Leave them out of this. They didn't know. Neither did my children, I snapped, my voice finally losing its calm. My children didn't know their father was planning to call their mother a madwoman so he could play house with you. They didn't know their future was being spent on your shoe collection. You were happy to watch my life burn as long as you were sitting in the VIP lounge. I stood up straight, smoothing my jacket. I'm not going to jail you, Chloe. I'm going to let you stay in this apartment for exactly 1 more hour. After that, the sheriff will be here to seize every item of value. You'll be left with your personal things, the clothes you brought with you before you met my husband. And as for your career? No clinic in this country will hire an assistant who schemes from the till. What am I supposed to do? She wailed. The same thing I did for 12 years, I said, heading for the door. Work 3 jobs. Wear shoes with holes in them. And hope that the person you're sacrificing for actually has a soul. Though in your case, I wouldn't hold your breath. As I stepped into the hallway, I heard the sound of her expensive glass vase shattering against the wall. It was a beautiful sound, the sound of another piece of Mark's ego breaking into 1,000 pieces. I checked my watch. I had a meeting with the board of the new Restorative Hope Foundation in 20 minutes. I had spent a decade being the ghost in Mark's house. Now, I was the one deciding who got to live in mine. But as I reached my car, Marcus called. Anna, we have a problem. Mark's lawyer just filed an emergency motion. He's claiming that since you secretly ran a business while being a housewife, you were in material breach of your marriage contract. He's trying to claim half of Sterling and Associates. I smiled into the phone. Let him try, Marcus. He's about to find out that Sterling and Associates isn't just a company. It's an ironclad trap. Mark's lawyer was truly desperate. The motion they filed was a scorched earth tactic. If Mark was going down for fraud, he wanted to take my empire with him. Their argument was that because I was married to Mark while building Sterling and Associates, the entire conglomerate was marital property. Under the law, he claimed he was entitled to 50% of everything, my buildings, my tech investments, and my secret accounts. When we met in the high-ceilinged conference room for the deposition, Mark looked smug for the first time in days. He leaned back, his hands behind his head, as his lawyer, a man named Henderson, laid out their demands. It's quite simple, Mrs. Miller, Henderson said, sliding a ledger across the table. You used marital time, marital resources, and, we suspect, the initial capital from Dr. Miller's early salary to seed your investments. Therefore, Dr. Miller is a silent partner in Sterling and Associates. We are prepared to drop our contest of the custody arrangement if you sign over half the shares of your holding company. Mark grinned. You were too smart for your own good, Anna. You built me a golden parachute without even knowing it. I looked at Mark, then at Henderson, and finally at Marcus. Marcus didn't look worried. He looked bored. Mr. Henderson, Marcus said, opening a blue leather folder. It's a fascinating theory. But it suffers from one major flaw: documentation. Marcus pulled out a document from 13 years ago, the day before Mark and I got married at a small courthouse. Mark's grin faltered. Do you recognize this, Mark? I asked. It's the prenuptial agreement you insisted on. The one your father's lawyer drafted because you were so afraid that a waitress like me would try to steal your future surgeon's salary. That only protects my earnings. Mark snapped. It doesn't protect a billion-dollar company you started while we were married. Actually, Mark, you should have read the sunset clause and the separate property rider you made me sign, I said, leaning forward. Paragraph 9 states that any and all business ventures, investments, or intellectual property managed solely by one party, using funds derived from outside the marital pool, shall remain the sole and exclusive property of that party, regardless of the duration of the marriage. But you didn't have outside funds. Henderson countered. You were a waitress. No, I said, pulling out a faded bank statement from a small town in the Midwest. I was a waitress who had a life before you. My grandfather left me a small plot of land in North Dakota. You never asked about it because you thought my family was dirt poor. In 2014, that dirt was found to sit right on top of a massive shale oil deposit. I sold the mineral rights for $2 million 3 months after we married. Mark's face went from smug to ghostly. $2 million? You had $2 million and you let me work 80-hour weeks? I worked 3 jobs while you were in med school, Mark. I didn't touch that money because I wanted to see if you loved me for me, or for what I could do for you. And when you started treating me like a servant the moment you got your MD, I decided that money wasn't for us. It was for my escape. I leaned in closer, my voice dropping to a whisper that cut through the room. I tracked every penny. I never used a cent of your salary to fund Sterling and Associates. In fact, I used my company to pay for our shared vacations and your business expenses through shell companies, just to keep the marital pool clean of my private wealth. Legally, you haven't contributed a single dollar to my success. But I have contributed millions to yours, which I am now clawing back as unauthorized business loans made by Sterling and Associates to the Zenith Clinic. Henderson looked at the documents, his hands starting to shake. He looked at Mark and shook his head. The golden parachute had just turned into a lead weight. One more thing, Mark, I said, standing up. Because you filed this motion claiming marital partnership in my business, you've legally admitted to being aware of the company's operations. That means you are now personally liable for the bad faith lawsuit Sterling and Associates just filed against the clinic's former management. By trying to claim half my company, you just signed on for half of my legal wrath. Mark surged out of his chair, but the security guards I had hired were faster. He was pinned against the glass wall, his face pressed against the reflection of the city he used to rule. You're a demon, he screamed. You planned this for years. You watched me fail. I watched you choose to be a villain, Mark, I said, picking up my briefcase. I just made sure I owned the script. I walked out of the room, leaving him with his useless lawyer and his broken greed. But as I reached the elevator, Marcus tapped my shoulder. Anna, the medical board just finished their final review. Mark's license is being revoked permanently. But there's a rumor, he's planning something desperate for tonight. He knows he has nothing left to lose. The penthouse was quiet, but it was the kind of silence that feels heavy, like the air before a lightning strike. My children were safe at my sister's house in the country, guarded by a detail I trust with my life. I was alone, sitting in the dark of my living room, watching the city lights. I knew Mark. I knew that beneath the tailored suits and the surgical precision, there was a man who couldn't handle being small. To Mark, being nothing was worse than being dead. At 11:30 p.m., the silent alarm on my phone pulsed. Someone had bypassed the service entrance using a keycard that should have been deactivated. I didn't call the police yet. I wanted to see his face. I wanted him to see mine. The heavy oak doors to the foyer creaked open. Footsteps, heavy and uneven, echoed on the marble. He wasn't trying to be quiet. He was past the point of stealth. "Anna," he roared, his voice bouncing off the high ceilings. "I know you're here. Come out and look at what you've done." I stood up and turned on a single lamp. Mark was standing in the doorway. He looked unrecognizable. His hair was matted, his shirt was torn at the collar, and he was clutching a heavy, leather-bound medical case, his original surgical kit from residency. In his other hand was a bottle of expensive scotch, half empty. "You look terrible, Mark," I said, my voice steady. "The king of beauty is looking a little unrefined." "You think this is funny?" He stumbled forward, nearly tripping over a designer rug. "You took it all. My clinic, my money, my reputation. You even took Chloe. She's testifying, Anna. She's telling them about the Maldives research. Do you have any idea what they'll do to me?" "They'll give you exactly what you earned," I replied. "A cell and a lot of time to think about why you thought a minivan wouldn't eventually run you over." "I'm not going to jail," he hissed, his eyes wide and glassy. He set the scotch bottle down and opened the surgical case. Inside were rows of gleaming scalpels and syringes. "I'm a surgeon. I decide who lives and who dies. I made you, Anna. You were just a girl with a tray and a name tag. I gave you this life." "No, Mark. I gave you yours. I paid for the hands you're so proud of. I paid for the brain you used to lie to me. You were an investment that failed. And I've liquidated my position." He grabbed a scalpel, the blade catching the lamplight. "If I can't be the best, I'll be the last thing you ever see. I'll take your perfect face and I'll—" He lunged, but he was drunk and broken. I didn't even have to move. Two of my security team, who had been standing in the shadows of the hallway, stepped out. One caught his arm, twisted it until the scalpel clattered to the floor, and the other pinned him against the cold glass of the window. Mark let out a sob, a pathetic, wailing sound that filled the room. All the glory, all the power, all the branding dissolved into the tears of a man who realized he was completely, utterly alone. "Don't hurt him," I said to the guards. "Just hold him. I want him to hear this." I walked over to where he was pinned, staring into his bloodshot eyes. "I didn't call the police for the break-in, Mark. I called the paramedics. I've already submitted the footage of you breaking into this apartment with a weapon to the court. But I'm also submitting the toxicology report from the clinic's private stash, the one you've been dipping into to keep your nerves steady during surgery." Mark stopped struggling. How did you get those?" "I own the lab that processes your clinic's blood work, Mark. I've owned it for 3 years. I have proof that you've performed at least 12 surgeries in the last month while under the influence of narcotics. That's not just fraud. That's attempted manslaughter." "Please," he whispered, his head sagging. "Anna, please. Don't do this. I'll go away. I'll leave the country. Just don't send me to prison." "You already built your own prison, Mark. I'm just handing you the keys." The sirens began to wail in the distance, getting closer. I watched as the paramedics and the police entered the building. As they led him out in handcuffs, his surgical kit left behind on my floor, I felt a strange sense of emptiness. Not because I missed him, but because the ghost I had lived with for 12 years was finally gone. I picked up the scalpel from the floor and looked at my reflection in the polished steel. For the first time in my life, I didn't see a waitress, a mother, or a plain wife. I saw the principal. The grand opening of the Restorative Hope Foundation was nothing like the Zenith Clinic galas of the past. There were no flashy red carpets, no overpriced champagne, and no photographers looking for the perfect angle. Instead, the lobby was filled with soft light, comfortable chairs, and the quiet, nervous smiles of women who were finally ready to look in the mirror again. I stood in the back of the room, watching as my new head of surgery, a woman who had dedicated her life to helping burn victims and survivors of violence, spoke to the press. She spoke about healing, about dignity, and about the fact that beauty isn't something you buy, it's something you reclaim. My name wasn't on the building. The name Sterling was tucked away in the legal filings. To the world, I was just a donor. To the patients, I was a ghost. And that was exactly how I wanted it. 6 months had passed since the night Mark broke into my home. The legal fallout had been swifter than I expected. Mark had pleaded guilty to multiple counts of medical fraud and embezzlement to avoid the more serious charges of attempted manslaughter. He was currently serving a 10-year sentence in a minimum security facility. Without his brand, without his wealth, and without his scalpels, he was just inmate number 48291. Chloe had vanished. After her parents' house was seized and her reputation in the medical community was incinerated, she took what was left of her savings and moved to a different state. Last I heard, she was working in retail, far away from the world of high-stakes aesthetics. I walked out of the clinic and headed toward my car. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Marcus. The final audit of Mark's personal accounts is complete. Every cent stolen from the Children's Trust has been recovered and reinvested. You're officially the sole guardian of the estate. Congratulations, Anna. You won. I looked at the message, but I didn't feel the surge of triumph I expected. Instead, I felt a profound sense of stillness. I drove to the small park near my children's school. I sat on a bench and watched them play. They looked happy. They looked healthy. They didn't know that their mother was one of the most powerful investors in the city. They didn't know that she had dismantled a kingdom to keep them safe. To them, I was just mom, the person who showed up for every soccer game and knew exactly how they liked their sandwiches cut. I realized then that Mark had been right about one thing: he did make me. But not in the way he thought. By trying to diminish me, he forced me to grow. By trying to silence me, he taught me how to listen to the markets. By trying to replace me, he made me realize I was irreplaceable. As the sun began to set, casting long, golden shadows across the grass, I took out my old wedding ring, the one Mark had picked out to show off his success. I walked over to a small pond at the edge of the park and let it slip from my fingers. It vanished into the dark water without a sound. I wasn't a stain on a reputation. I wasn't a minivan. I wasn't an unstable shadow. I was the architect of my own life. And for the first time, the view was absolutely beautiful.